Good morning, everybody. It is time for another morning Bible study. I'm your host, Logan McCulley, and today we're going to get into, drumroll please, Galatians. So, me and Jennifer were talking about it last night, and she's been studying the fruit of the Spirit. I was like, well, where's that at? She's like, it's in Galatians. I was like, well, then there you go. Galatians seems like the spot. So, we'll do the setup for Galatians. Before we do that, let me tell everybody out there that's new here, this is the spot where we learn about the Bible. I'm not a pastor. Maybe you are. I'm just learning the Bible. We're going to read it, go through it, and we've got this MacArthur Study Bible that's helping guide us in our discussion. That being said, the setup for Galatians. Galatians derives its title from the region in Asia Minor, modern Turkey, where the churches addressed were located. It is only one of Paul's epistles specifically addressed to the churches in more than one city. Okay, so he's speaking to more than one city, and that is Galatians. So author and date. There is no reason to question the internal claims that the Apostle Paul wrote Galatians, and we'll see that in 1:1 and 5:2. Paul was born in Tarsus, a city in the province of Cilicia, not far from Galatia, under the famous Rabbi Gamaliel. Paul received a thorough training in the Old Testament scriptures and the rabbinic traditions at Jerusalem. A member of the ultra-Orthodox sect of the Pharisees, he was one of the first century Judaism's rising stars. The course of Paul's life took a sudden, startling turn when on his way to Damascus from Jerusalem to persecute Christians, he was confronted by the risen, glorified Christ. That dramatic encounter turned Paul from Christianity's chief prosecutor to its greatest missionary. His 3 missionary journeys and a trip to Rome turned Christianity from a faith that included only a small group of Palestinian Jewish believers into an empire-wide phenomenon. Galatians is one of the 13 inspired letters he addressed to the Gentile congregation or his fellow workers. For further biographical information on Paul, see the introduction to Romans. In chapter 2, Paul describes his visit to Jerusalem, the Council of Acts 15. So he must have written Galatians after that event. Since most scholars date Jerusalem Council about 49 AD, the most likely date for Galatians is shortly thereafter. Okay, so in chapter 2, he describes his visit to the Jerusalem Council of Acts 15. Alright, so let's talk about the background and settings. What's going on in the world? Where's Paul at? In Paul's day, the word Galatia had 2 distinct meanings. In a strict ethic sense, Galatia was a region of Central Asia Minor, inhabited by the Galatians. They were a Celtic people who had migrated to that region from Gaul, which is modern France, in the 3rd century before Christ. The Romans conquered the Galatians in 189 BC. So in 200 years before Jesus, the Romans conquered Galatia, but allowed them to have some measure of independence until 25 years before Christ, when Galatia became a Roman province incorporating some regions not inhabited by ethnic Galatia, parts of like Laconia and Phrygia and Pisidia. In a political sense, Galatia came to describe the entire Roman province, not merely the region inhabited by the ethnic Galatians. Paul founded churches in the southern Galatian cities of Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. These cities, although within the Roman province of Galatia, were not in the ethnic Galatian region. There is no record of Paul's founding churches in that northern, less populated region. Those 2 uses of the word Galatia make it more difficult to determine who the original recipient of the epistles were. Some interpret Galatia as in a strict racial sense and argue that Paul addressed this epistle to the churches in the northern Galatian region, inhabited by the ethnic descendants of the Gauls. Although the apostle apparently crossed the border into the fringes of ethnic Galatia on at least 2 occasions, and that's going to be from Acts 16 and 18, Acts does not record that he founded any churches or engaged in any evangelistic ministry there. Because neither Acts nor Galatia mentions any cities or people from northern Galatia, the ethnic Galatia, It is reasonable to believe that Paul addressed this epistle to the churches located in the southern part of the Roman province. But outside of the ethnic Galatian region, Acts records the apostles' founding of such churches as Pisidian, Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra, and Derbe. In addition to the churches Paul addressed, the churches Paul addressed had apparently been established before the Jerusalem Council, and the churches of southern Galatia fit the criteria. Having been founded during Paul's first missionary journey before the council met, Paul did not visit northern ethnic Galatia until after the Jerusalem Council. So what we're saying is, these letters were written to the Galatia as a whole, not the Galatian ethnic people. Paul wrote Galatians to counter. Oh, okay, so what did he write for? Paul wrote the wrote the book of Galatians to counter Judaizing false teachers who were undermining the central New Testament doctrine of justification by faith. So what were they doing? They were undermining the central New Testament doctrine of justification by faith. And that comes from Romans 3. Let's go see, 3:31. All right. Do we then make void the law through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish the law. Do we then make void the law through faith? Knowing he would be accused of, antinomianism, being against the law, for arguing that a man was justified apart from keeping the law, Paul introduced here the defense he later develops in chapter 6 and 7. Through faith we establish the law. Salvation by grace through faith does not denigrate the law, but underscores its true importance. By providing a payment for the penalty of death, which the law requires for failing to keep it, by fulfilling the law's original purpose, which is to serve as a tutor to show mankind's utter inability to obey God's righteous demands and to drive people to Christ, and by giving believers the capacity to obey it. Okay. So there's people that are still trying to do the Old Testament stuff. And Paul is trying to not let them undermine the central New Testament doctrine of justification by faith. Now, ignoring the express decree of the Jerusalem Council, they spread their dangerous teaching that Gentiles the Jerusalem Council, the Gentiles must first become Jewish proselytes and submit to all the Mosaic law before they could first become Christians. Shocked by the Galatians' openness to the damning heresy, Paul wrote this letter to defend justification by faith and warn these churches of the dire consequences of abandoning that essential doctrine. Galatians is the only epistle Paul wrote that does not contain condemnation for its readers. Let me say that again. Does not contain a commendation for its... Oh, it doesn't say, hey, y'all are doing a great job. It's the only letter that doesn't say, hey, you did a good job. That obvious omission reflects how urgently he felt about confronting the defecation and defending of the essential doctrine of justification. Defection. Confronting the defection? They're leaving the essential doctrine of the justification. So Paul's not happy. That's what I'm getting. Paul's not happy in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And he's making that very abundantly clear. Historical and theological themes. Galatians provides valuable historical information about Paul's backgrounds, including his 3-year stay in Nabatania, Arabia, which Acts does not mention his 15-day visit with Peter after his stay in Arabia, his trip to the Jerusalem Council, and his confrontation of Peter. As already noted, the central theme of Galatians, like that of Romans, is justification by faith. Paul defends that doctrine, which is the heart of the gospel, both in its theological and practical ramifications. He also defends his position as an apostle, since in Corinth, false teachers had attempted to gain a hearing for their heretical teaching by undermining Paul's credibility. The main theological theme, Paul's. He's also defending himself. because people are attacking, is he credible? I get it. You have to address the haters sometimes. The main theological themes of Galatians are strikingly similar to those of Romans. The example is the inability of the law to justify. The law cannot justify. The believer's deadness to the law. The believer's crucifixion with Christ. Abraham's justification by faith. That believers are Abraham's spiritual children and therefore blessed. They shall live by faith. The universality of sin. That believers are spiritually baptized into Christ. Believers' adoption of God's spiritual, or as God's spiritual children. That love fulfills the law. The importance of walking in the Spirit. The warfare of the flesh against the Spirit. And the importance of believers bearing on one another's burdens. It's a lot. That's a lot that we're going to be getting into, guys. That is a lot. But that's why we're doing it. Didn't say fruit of the Spirit, but I think we'll find it in there. Interpretive challenges. First, Paul describes a visit to Jerusalem and a subsequent meeting with Peter, James, and John. There is a question to be resolved in that text as to whether that was his visit to the Jerusalem Council or his earlier visit bringing famine relief to the Jerusalem church. Second, those who teach baptismal regeneration, the false doctrine that baptism is necessary for salvation, support their view from the verse 3:27. Okay, so that's also a thing. Third, others have used this epistle to support their attacks on the biblical roles of men and women, claiming that the spiritual equality taught in 3:28 is incompatible with the traditional concept of authority and submission. Fourth, those who reject the doctrine of eternal security argue that the phrase, "you have fallen from grace," describes believers who lost their salvation. Fifth, there is a disagreement whether Paul's statement, "See what the large letters I have written to you in my own hand," refers to the entire letter or merely to concluding verses. Finally, many claim that Paul erased the line between Israel and the church when he identified the church as the Israel of God. Those challenges will be addressed in the notes to the appropriate passages. We got a lot coming in Galatians, guys. We got a lot coming. And it's I think it's only 6 chapters, but they're very large and meaty chapters. Broken way down. Broken way down. Way down. So, that's what we've got to look forward to. I'm excited to get into it and see what's up. That's what we're doing. We're moving to Galatians. So, re-listen to that. That's a lot that we just went through. Before I leave, though, I'm going to pray for you and I'm going to pray for me. Lord, thank you so much for everything you've done for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Help us share your word. Help us find those people that are in your book of life that just don't know it yet. Help us get them, grab them, tell them about you. Help us see those opportunities. Make us see those opportunities. Make us not be able to stop feeling it. Thank you for everything you've done, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen. That's it. This has been the Mormon Bible Study. I'm your host, Logan McCulley, and I'm out.